Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to the Building a Sustainable Business Using Open Data session. I think many of you will have been at our first gathering when we put the project together, and today is about our industry judging panel, meeting them, and of course the all-important winning idea selection, which I'm sure we're all looking forward to. In a minute, we're going to hear from Colm Hayden from Anaeko, and he is going to remind us of the process, the rules, and the why we're here today and what we're going to hear in terms of getting to a winner. But before we do that, I'll just briefly explain what it is we've got coming up. So we're going to start with two speeches from leading thinkers in the data space. And they're going to give us some real world examples of what people are doing in data, one from Scotland and one from Northern Ireland, and more about them briefly. But to start us off, I'm very excited to invite Colm Hayden up. So Colm, you'll come and join me, and I'll get out the way and you can remind us of the process we're going through. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Brilliant. So I'll come out the way, and please remind us of why we're here today and the process we're going to be going through. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm Colm Hayden. I'm the CTO at Anaeko. We're a data optimization company who have a particular interest in open data. And working with Open Data NI, we set about an outreach to look at and promote and enable discussions around the use of open data. And because I've gone through quite a history, and Anaeko has, of working with and enabling and using open data, we're technologists, but we know that the value of data is driven by how it's used. We wanted to form a competition that looked more about the business models behind open data to create a pull to emphasize the value. And I think the speakers that we have today will showcase that. They're focused on the value of data. So the competition, if I share some slides here, I'll do this. The competition was announced a month ago, or sorry, at the start of June. And we created a business model focused competition, so focused on the value of that data. We made it available to everyone, so we opened it up to students, graduates, and professionals. At our first event that Robin described, a very similar networking event combining some very interesting presentations, we announced that. And we accepted written applications using a form we provided. So they were submitted. We had a good mixture, which was great to show the variety of interest in open data. And the Anaeko team did a first review and shortlisting of them. And the judging criteria focused on three main areas: the innovation and the innovative use of open data. And we had a particular focus on open data in Northern Ireland from the Open Data NI website and portal. But it also raised queries about data that wasn't yet available or was of more value or increasing value. And that stimulated a discussion. So that was part of the initiative, was to see what kind of information Open Data NI should have been providing and can provide, and to explore the viability of using that within a business model. And in particular, we were looking and favoring for applications that had a socio-economic impact. And of course, throughout all of this, there's been a lot of the impact and transformation of the global pandemic. So that impact during lockdown and the aftermath was another area that was pertinent, albeit not specifically needed. So in today, we have shortlisted 3 mini pitches from 3 different teams that we felt most represented a different innovative idea that had real business value. And we're going to invite them today to present to our expert judging panel representing innovation founders, academia, public sector, and the venture capital community. And that expert judging panel, following the mini pitches, will judge those, and we will announce that winner before the event finishes. The winner will receive a comprehensive combination of a cash prize, some VC mentoring, some entrepreneur mentoring, and some legal guidance, as well as the publicity from this event. So I welcome you all here today. I'm glad to see a good turnout. I really don't want to detract from the time available to our keynote speakers. So without further ado, I will stop introducing this, and I'll welcome back to allow the speakers to come to the stage. And I hope you have a great event. Myself and the Anaeko team will be around the networking events during the networking times, and hope to speak to you then. So thank you and welcome again.
Brilliant. Thank you, Colin. That's a great explanation of the process we're going through today. However, before we get to that, we do have, as Colin just said, we have 2 great speakers who have been doing amazing things with data, and it's my enormous pleasure to begin by inviting Alexander Holt, Scottish Government, to talk to us about using data to drive daring and innovation in the public sector. And I've known Alexander a long time. We've known each other a wee while, Alexander, as you'd say,
really? Yeah.
Up in Edinburgh. And it's great to have you here to tell us about the work that CivTech have been doing. And I know you're going to wow us with some of the recent successes that you've achieved. So, sir, I'll come out the way. The floor is yours.
Sure, absolutely. Well, Robin and Colin, thank you very much for inviting me, and congratulations to those who will be participating and shortlisted. So well done. So 4.5 years ago, I set up a program called CivTech for the Scottish Government, and it was there to do 3 things. Firstly, in a world where technology moves so quickly, how do you procure what you don't know exists? Secondly, how can we leverage the purchasing power of the public purse to deliver better public services, but also provide economic development opportunities? And thirdly, how do we create the capacity, the capability, and the culture to move public servants from risk aversion to risk receptiveness? And those were the kind of the drivers behind setting up a truly innovative and true innovation program. So today you are looking at open innovation, and what I want to explore with some of the case studies, not just about the use of data, but more about the relationship that you can have with public sector, and what that looks like, and how to navigate some of those sometimes challenging relationships. So CivTech's mission is about driving daring and innovation in the public sector by collaboratively solving challenges that make people's lives better, and so creating generations of sustainable businesses. So it's that whole premise around that procurement challenge we have of again, you know, how do we procure what we don't know exists? So setting public sector challenges and matching it with entrepreneurial talent. So we've run the program over 4.5 years. We're just kicking off our 5th cohort. We've run 47 challenges, most of which have involved some sort of data usage. You know, the exercise and the competition you're involved in at the moment is absolutely, and something that we passionately believe in and can see the results of. So I'll just give you some examples that, and I won't have any slides to show, but I'll just talk through a few. We've had challenges from one of our enterprise agencies who wanted their overseas divisions to understand which would be the best companies and countries to attract for inward investment. And so we had a respondents, a couple of data scientists responded to this challenge now 3 years ago. And from there built a platform that could scrape in data that was around and package it into a format that would give people market intelligence around who they should attract. Now that company was called DeepMiner, and they went on now to have raised their first seed funding to the tune of about just $500,000, and they have developed a product that actually, whilst it was born for public sector use, then came out for actually real use within the oil and gas sector. And so they've grown, and so when we think about sustainable business models, it's thinking here's a use for one sector, but actually how can it be transferred? So when Colm's talking about viability of your products, thinking about where are the secondary markets that we could take it. So that was DeepMiner with one of our enterprise agencies. And then for CivTech 3, 2 years ago, we ran a challenge with Police Scotland, Trading Standards Scotland, and HMRC. And this was around exploring anti-illicit trading. So how could we understand what was being illicitly traded, and could we set up some sort of alert for consumers to be able to watch what they were buying? And so we had a very interesting trio of seasoned entrepreneurs tackling this one, who came up with the company Vistalworks. And Vicky Brock, who is the chief exec of Vistalworks, had this was her 5th business, and they produced an algorithm that was able to, with various permutations, spot whether something was likely to be fake when you bought it on eBay. But the key thing here was this partnership between HMRC, Trading Standards Scotland, and Police Scotland, and how they worked in a completely different manner because of the process that CivTech runs, and this real collaboration. So it's a very fruitful relationship, and Vicky's currently in Estonia on various government programs there, so has absolutely gone on to grow the business. And then my 3rd example was one that we did with Scottish Natural, with Historic Environment Scotland, who are responsible for 400 or so artifacts and kind of installations around Scotland. So Edinburgh Castle to an unmanned set of Pictish stones in the Outer Hebrides. So in this case, the challenge around remote sites was not really understanding the footfall and a number of people visiting them. And this is a problem for conservation reasons, because certainly up in Orkney, there's an issue around big cruise liners coming in with 500 or so, 5,000 passengers disembarking and then going back onto the ship. And so kind of being able to understand the footfall of a place, and therefore setting up sensors which could gather data and bring in other factors around environment, humidity, to build up a picture of what was going on around these sites. And so that's been rolled out across about 40 sites for Scottish Natural Heritage, Historic Environment Scotland. We do a lot with Scottish Natural Heritage, come off the tongue. So, you know, those are just 3 examples. But Robin, I don't know if you want to explore anything more around either process or the relationship, because whilst open data is obviously doing data openly, often it'll be about relationships with public sector. And so, you know, what are the key things we need to think of and look for?
Sorry, Alexander, slightly slow coming back on there. So, yes, I mean, this procurement piece, I think, so we've obviously got our teams, we've got 3 teams we'll be hearing from today who are using open data to try and build a sustainable business. How open has the Scottish government been in sharing their data? Because monetizing data is attractive. And I know with geospatial data, there's sort of quite a long-running issue with Ordnance Survey and other partners wanting to monetize that. In this environment, the open data is being given freely so that others can monetize it as a business. So is that a model that's worked well in Scotland, or have there been issues with Scottish data holders wanting to sort of raise revenue from that data?
Absolutely. So we recognize the public sector here, as indeed in every country, holds on to a huge amount of data. And so what we've set up in Scotland is Research Data Scotland. So this is a new, it's actually a CIC, so a community interest company. So there are particular rules around what it can and can't do. And I'll just put the link into the chat for everyone, general chat. I think I'm in the general chat. Let's just check we're in that. Can everyone see that? Has that come up for everyone?
I'm just having a look. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. So there, what they've done is they're pulling together all sorts of data sets from across the public sector into a format that then people can openly manipulate and do what they like with. So, you know, we've currently gathered 240 data sets. A lot of it is around health, but we're pulling in other facets such as, you know, education, justice, and certainly the environmental side of things. So absolutely, you know, open data, and as the public sector gets more au fait with putting their data in the right formats and standardized formats that everyone then can access, the opportunities for building businesses absolutely multiply. And I think the key thing here is that, you know, it's not just about our own data. If you've got either a niche that is certainly fine, applicable in Northern Ireland, the rest of the UK, but where else? And always having this eye on the whole export potential of your product, and that's key. You know, as we've seen from the past, you know, COVID crisis and the 6 months of chaos, is actually it's the digital businesses that have survived or indeed thrived in this environment.
And do you think you need to put, I mean, you've talked about the sort of research data organization that Scotland's put in place. Is that necessary because the quality of data, the way it's collected, is kind of so variable across departments and often heavily siloed and not joined up in a usable way? Is the nature of that body to kind of get data ready for commercial use?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and our chief statistician, Roger Halliday, has done an amazing job. He's been responsible for all our COVID reporting. And so a real recognition that, you know, we sit on this data, that we can do stuff with it, that it's a bit like IP. You know, traditional terms and conditions would say that the intellectual property should remain with the government. What do we do with IP? We sit on it, do nothing with it. So actually, where should that IP reside? With value creators. And in the same way, that's the same principle with data, actually. You know, within reason, of course, there's the whole rules and ethics particularly around data. And that's something that's interesting happening in Scotland around its whole real focus around, you know, data and ethics of both data and AI as well. But yeah, we recognize this. That's what it's about. It's about releasing this stuff in there and seeing what happens. And a huge part of the city deal that was signed 2 years ago, so this is the Edinburgh and the Region City deal, largest one in the UK, 1.2 billion, was around data-driven innovation. And a lot of that, obviously, the foundations that in kind of education and data scientists, buildings. We'll see whether they're used. But that whole capability, so everyone recognizes the importance and the value of data and how you process it and then monetize it. And obviously that's what Anaeko has been very, very good at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the whole premise behind this partnership between the ODI in Northern Ireland and Anaeko is exactly about understanding, examining, feeling through that relationship between the commercialization of the commercial process and publicly owned data. And then just the challenge we're facing today and looking forward to meeting our 3 finalists is, can you build a sustainable model and business around it? And what you've explained to us fabulously is to start our session off is that, yes, you can. And this has been done very successfully in Scotland. Do you have any, before we finish, do you have, a tip for our 3 finalists as to what they should do next? If they win, even if they don't win, what's the next step, given they've gone through this initial kind of minimum viable project process?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So you've gone through this MVB process. You've now got something that has clearly got to the last stage because of hitting the criteria around innovation, viability, and impact. And so I think now it's about tapping on some doors. It's about validating this. Users are at the heart of everything you develop. And one of the slides I was showing was my final slide is a can of WD-39. So that these things take time to develop. Always get the feedback. Focus on the user, but absolutely start tapping on doors within public sector. And every devolved administration have departments that are there to engage with innovators and innovative products. So, and what we've seen in COVID is the forefront of technologies have often come from smaller businesses, and therefore you've needed bridge building programs such as CivTech or the GovTech Catalyst to bring people together that wouldn't otherwise necessarily come together. But my top tip is test, focus on the user.
Brilliant. Alexander, you've got us off to a flying start. I'm very conscious as an Englishman talking to a Scotsman in front of a Northern Ireland audience. So we must get this more local and quickly, Alexander.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Take care. Brilliant. Well, thank you, Alexander, for getting us off to a flying start and bringing across the short stretch of water some great examples from Scotland. However, I'd now like to invite up on stage Will Watkins, who is Red Hat's Transformation Practice Lead, and he is going to give our second talk today, which he's called Farming for the Future, which is pretty exciting. And here you are, Will. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well, Robin. I think the only thing worse you could do is invite an American up to stage. So
yes, well, at some point between us, we're going to allow a Northern Irish person on this stage. But in the meantime, I can see you've loaded up your slides, so I'm going to get out the way, and I really look forward to hearing what you're presenting to us today.
Absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for having me today. My name is Will Watkins. I lead our transformation business for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at Red Hat. And I have kind of an interesting path to how I got here to Red Hat. But for those that aren't aware of Red Hat or what we do, our mission is really to be the catalyst in communities, contributors, and really evangelizing the open source way. And so we've done a fair amount of taking open source, freely available data, turning it into a viable business company, and then proceeding from there. I often get asked questions, what is transformation anyways? And this is what I go around and I talk to most of our customers about. And everyone's going through some element of transformation, be it digital or agile, or even leveraging open data. But ultimately, to me, it's about unlocking new lines of business through technology, and that technology is also the information on which the technology accesses. And the other thing is that typically it's the technology, it's easy, it's the cultural change that really has to occur. It's the behavior in the people that experience it. But rather than give you kind of my normal spiel, I thought today it might be nice to talk about my background and then have a little bit of fun. So I've been at Red Hat for about 4 years. I think one of the greatest things about the company is a sense of community that we've really kind of gained. I have never been in another place where people are so passionate about what they do. And I think it's because as a community, we have a centralized purpose and we understand kind of how to focus. I wasn't always at Red Hat, and I actually was an intelligence officer in the US military prior to Red Hat, where I did quite a bit with probably the most closed data sources that you could think, and tried to understand how to use and leverage them to make predictive analysis. And then even before that, I started to look at kind of community passion and purpose. I was a developer in a past life, and I studied religion in school. So if you could think of two very different things at odds, I was looking at the intersection between cultures and communities, and what drives people to move things forward. And so I want to start with a problem statement, and this isn't necessarily true for Northern Ireland, but this is true in the US. Kind of in the farming and agricultural industry, there's this concept that any farmer has about 40 seasons to learn their craft and really evolve and improve it. And that's a very finite number within a lifetime. Similarly, by 2050, there will be an increase of up to 49% of global demand for food or agricultural products. And probably the most appalling in the US, the average age of the farmer is 58, which seems kind of crazy that we have 40 years takes to kind of build a knowledge base. The demand is going up significantly over the next 30 years, but we have a large population that's actually exiting industry, and we're not actually introducing new concepts. And so rather than talk about kind of the particular problems, I thought I just moved to Munich. Let's have some fun. Let's talk about it through a different lens. So if you can't figure out what these ingredients, oats, barley, hops are, these are the ingredients for beer. And I think that it's really interesting to talk about open data as it applies to the beer industry, both kind of the established as well as the craft brewing industry that's formed over the last couple of years. So if you'll forgive my terrible Wardley mapping, let's go through just a very brief understanding of beer. Started with this idea of mead. A bee got trapped in a jar of fruit and water. All of a sudden, somebody took a sip. Alcohol was born. The customer here is very nascent in the Genesis days, but there's not a real understanding of the information that was required. We have some very kind of key components to understand how to evolve this, but everything happened through innovation and experimentation from this point. It was a trial and error process. If we fast forward, you have here in Germany where I live, you start to understand, well, we know we need barley, hops, and water. Now there's this element of maybe we need somebody that puts those ingredients together correctly, because at the time when the German purity law came about, they were injecting a whole lot of other things into beer. Beer was actually safer to drink than water that was mixed with sewage. And so they needed to control it, not only so that it had a certain kind of safety and quality to it, they also needed to make sure that they used barley for production of beer, since wheat was used for the very important bread industry. But if you see the beer itself, it's moving from kind of that Genesis phase into custom built. And I think through standardization, the purity law, the idea was to move it to product. But this is a space where not all information is enough information. Sometimes we have a wicked problem that we really need to understand how it's gone in, or how the ingredients compile to make the produced good. And if anyone's noticed yet, we're missing a very critical component to beer that was really only discovered around the 1850s. And that's yeast. And people weren't realizing that local yeast from the area was actually what was going in and eating the sugars to create alcohol. And so it started to really evolve this idea of what is beer, how can we leverage it, how might an entrepreneur actually be able to take this and move forward. And here you have Augustiner Brau, one of the oldest breweries in Munich, and the Oktoberfest was kind of born. But as this has evolved even further into craft brewery, you start to see established things like water or malt or barley or hops or even yeast that have become more commoditized actually start to get pulled back into the custom built and genesis phase through the information and data that's available. And the one incontrovertible truth for beer is the fresher, the better. And so all of a sudden, people started becoming disenchanted with having to import beer over large distances, even with all the technology available to bottles and canning. And you started to see people that wanted to reproduce their favorite beer in their local setting. And that meant changing some things. So if anyone's a home brewer, this is pretty much the home brewing Bible. But it comes up with a few kind of very key concepts. And one is that the ingredients matter. And this should have been a no-brainer, but everything from the most important, probably the water, to the barley, mash, yeast, hops, all kind of go into a flavor profile and a mouthfeel for a beer that necessarily creates a consumer's ideal of what beer should be. And so the consumer experience becomes very critical in craft brewing to create kind of variety. The other is that understanding that culture as catalyst, that yeast culture is actually, that pitch is what creates the beer, and it is what physically transforms those ingredients into something else. And yeast is wildly various and different depending on how it's cultivated, where it comes from, and what happens. But ultimately, they started to realize that there is a need not to close off and create secret recipes, but actually through collaboration and technology, we can create community of how to share kind of beer tips, brewing tips, something that goes from the hobbyist to the professional. And this resonates with me at Red Hat because Linux and Red Hat was always thought to be a hobbyist profile. And then, 26 years later, we are obviously not hobbyists anymore. But if you start to think about these things, like you start to understand that if you can bring data into the equation and take something that's freely available to understand water tables in a specific region, alkalinity, salinity, if you can start to kind of modulate the pH, if you can then share those recipes with others so that they have something reproducible, you actually create more knowledge, more understanding of the process, which allows for more innovation and experimentation. And so ingredients matter. If you actually then start to identify something like yeast that is very nascent in our understanding of it, you start to be able to build kind of this entrepreneurial relationship around the open data that's being collected of different yeast strains and how they're being collected. And now you have a whole separate part of the craft brewing industry that doesn't brew beer at all. They just create yeast for other brewers to use. And this is true of the hobbyist all the way up to the experienced professional. And then you realize that beer itself is all about a feedback loop. It's all about production and consumption, that collaboration, that immediate understanding of how your delivered product is resonating with your customers becomes and builds a community around it. And I like beer for that fact that it is a community builder. So if I bring it all the way back to why does open data matter, the way that we're going to answer the questions of the future around farming, be it for beer or anything else, is really through leveraging open source. And so rather than 40 seasons to learn, something like Farm OS, which compiles data from multiple different both Internet of Things technical devices as well as farmers across the world, allows you to kind of centralize a database and create thousands of years of experience over just the 40. And if you look at the demand of food by 2050, we understand that we're going to need to be able to leverage a platform to actually create scale to what we want to accomplish. This means finding new fertile ground or creating a seed that's more resilient. Like this happens through a platform that allows for collaboration. And this platform you see here is Open Data Hub, another open source project that allows you to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning tools to start to kind of introspect the data that becomes available. The third, the average age, we have to instill passion, and that means inspiring younger people to actually use technology in the agricultural industry to start to understand the values and what's there, as well as create entrepreneurs. And I love our collab open source space. It actually takes ideas and concepts of open source, including these, to young at-risk youths to start to teach them about Linux. So last thing, if you ever want to look at more of the kind of complex pieces around Open Data Hub, feel free. But I would say the future is collaborative. And I wanted to just congratulate everyone that's got this far with their MVPs. And hopefully this starts to spark some ideas of how do you take it to the enterprise. That's it for me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Will. I really enjoyed that. I think you, combination of farming and beer you're always on strong ground. I don't know about our Northern Ireland audience, but I felt like you're on strong ground there. And also you managed to combine two of my favorite things in the world, which was Applebee's Fish Restaurant at Borough Market next to one of my favorite pubs, the Wheat Sheaf. So I don't know whether that's just pure good luck or you're a great fan of the Borough Market as part of your farming passion.
I may have just lived next to the Borough Market for about 2 months. So
okay, well, we're not going to discuss that in front of us. I'm incredibly, thank you so much for sort of bringing that, because I think bringing data into the real world and into real world conversations is hugely valuable, because otherwise it can be seen as a niche. And I think our first two presentations have been about the fact that data, it's described as the new oil, and it is, everybody needs to engage with it, and it is vital to understand it if you're going to plan the future and implement things. So thank you so much for bringing that to us. I'm incredibly aware you stand between us and our finalists and talking about the competition. So thank you so much, Will, for joining us today. Thank you.